Hello friends, and welcome to another edition of Transformational Astrology. I'm Henry Seltzer, and we want to talk about the lunations of August. We're a little bit after the full moon, as it turns out by the timing of this video that we're making. And then on the other hand, the new moon coming up on August 18th is really powerful, so we'll take a look at that. I just want to kind of show some of the configurations that are coming up in these next couple months. And really what I'm about is explaining my basis for saying certain things. I just think it's really neat. There's people that talk about what has to happen in terms of the culture, in terms of the society. We're turning a corner. Black Lives Matter. There's a new way of looking at things, so we're trying to be more compassionate regarding each other. You know, we're trying to really be more inclusive as well, encouraging diversity. There's a lot of things that we're about as a society, as basically a progressive position on society could change for the better, which is where I'm coming from. It's a progressive notion that we can improve things, that there's ways that we are getting stuck in past centuries. The 1900s were very strict and all about logic and using our brain in a very linear, logical fashion. Got kind of knocked into a hat by Einstein and by Freud and Jung in the early 20th century. And we're still kind of working through that as we come into the 21st century and try to find a new way to be in this social contract that we have with each other in a way that is not patriarchal, that does include diversity and encourage diversity rather than frown upon diversity, that takes binary sexuality as not so much of a given, but as a departure point where we can go from there. And a lot of those things are just things that need to happen. And there's ways to talk about it, and there's many ways to talk about it. But what I like to do in talking about it is I like to relate it to the astrological archetypes that we can see coming together in very specific ways in the sky, because it ties it into an observable phenomena that we can actually track, and we can see in terms of dates as well, and get some idea of how the timing of this thing might be working out, which you can get from other ways. I mean, there's a lot of ways to find out how COVID's doing in this country, especially in the United States, and there's various reports on that. The indications are beyond the end of the year. I think that's what most of the epidemiologists would say. But I can say that as well, being an astrologer, from the standpoint of looking at the configurations of, it's Jupiter, Saturn together with Pluto right now is the big combination, and that's not quitting until after the end of the year. So it kind of matches up, and I think it's useful to look at those correlations, and but it's to see where we can go with it. So let's take a look at the charts. I'm going to move over and look at the actual chart. And this is the full moon chart that just took place on Monday morning. By the time you see this, it'll be probably more like Thursday. But we can still talk about what's happening with this full moon that was in the middle of Leo and Aquarius. So the Leo-Aquarius axis is also very interesting. It has to do with, let's think about that. Leo, is kind of almost the quintessential individualist, right? Look at me, shine, 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 Leo rising, big hair. So the Leo-Aquarius axis, however, because Aquarius does refer to the society, to groups of people, to friendships and connections to others. So it's can we use our creativity in a way that enhances the collective? And seeing the full moon that eliminates both of these from the angle of the sun being in one sign and the moon being the other sign, we can see that it's kind of a crucial moment maybe for having some of these philosophical thoughts about what we can do with our creativity. Everybody wants to find their fullest creativity. Everybody wants to find their freedom of expression. Everybody wants to find their deepest purpose, their deepest what they cannot not do is what I like to say, which I associate with the planet Eris, which is a brand new planet in the Western lexicon of planetary archetypes, referring to a feminine warrior, I call it, or a spiritual warrior, you could say, but coming from soul intention, coming from the standpoint of finding your deepest truth, articulating and acting upon that, and seeing how that works out. And we can find exemplars all through history going right back to William Blake is one of the key ones, because his Pluto-Uranus square, which is redolent of the Pluto-Uranus square that we have right now, which is redolent also of the Pluto-Uranus conjunction of the 60s, and he was so much a part of the 60s, with that notion that he had of inclusivity. Everything that lives is holy, is what he had to say. Well, Eris is right on, it enhances that square, because Eris is very close to his Pluto and making a much more perfect square with Uranus. So it's close, pretty close Pluto-Uranus square to begin with, but Eris really brings it out. It's right in the middle of it. And it makes it so clear to me because he was such an individualist. He had his own mythology, the way he thought about things. He saw beyond. He was very much of a free thinker, but also a thinker that went beyond his time, totally beyond his time. He's one of the few people from his time that we still pay attention to. Anyway, I'm getting a little bit off the topic, but one thing I wanted to bring up in connection with this full moon is I talked about it briefly before, but you can see that this full moon in the opposition around 11 degrees of Leo and Aquarius makes an almost perfect square to the Taurus, 10 degrees Taurus, 38 minutes of Uranus. So Uranus being very much a part of this full moon, we would say surprising events. We also want to say unexpected realizations. I love the Grateful Dead line. Once in a while you can get shown the light in the strangest of places if you look at it right. And it's basically tuning into your intuition, seeing things not in so much of a linear fashion, but in flashes of insight. You could say also epiphany is a way to resolve problems that could not be resolved after years of therapy, because you suddenly get it. You suddenly get the notion that just changes the whole picture. That's Uranus. And interestingly, there is a published blog piece on the full moon right now up on the Astrograph website. And you might think that was in hindsight that I wrote that we could have unexpected events, but that's just Uranus. That's all I was talking about. Subsequent to my writing that, the news came, I think it was on Monday, right on Monday. But it was, not, I didn't write that piece in the light of the news information about the Beirut bomb. I'm sorry, not the Beirut bombing, that's what Trump was saying. The Beirut industrial accident that was almost like a bomb going off, because it was this huge destructive force that killed, now they're saying over 60 people with 3,000 injured. Well, that was a surprise event. It was just out of the blue, all of a sudden this thing blew up. And you see that now, what we would probably see if we looked is we would probably be able to see how the planetary alignments also line up with the Earth, and take a look at Beirut, Lebanon. I was thinking about doing that. I forgot to do it. I'll go and look at it later and report on it. But basically, it's just interesting to see how these things pan out. And what's panning out for us right now, in the week of this full moon, is just the realization that there is more than what we can see just in front of us. More than mere logic will tell us. More than just the simple patterns of our lives. More than the fact that COVID is out of control and we need to social distance and we need to use masks and we need to be very careful of where we breathe, which is basically what the mask is all about. It reminds us to be careful not to breathe in somebody's face. It's that simple. You have, obviously, contagion is possible. You may not have it. You may have it and not know that you have it. And so, and you don't know about the other person near you. So if everybody does that, all of us do it together, and we don't breathe on each other, there's much less transmission. And that is so important right now to keep the number of deaths, to keep businesses to be able to open, because that way you can conduct business without fear. Because of the social distancing precautions, you can do it safely. So all of those things are the logic of the situation. But looking at it from another standpoint, if we take the Uranian viewpoint of what is this really all about, how can we see this in terms of a bigger picture? There is a societal reset that's happening right now, and we're getting off the normal, I call it the treadmill, the normal run of business, schedules and everything happening and all the traffic and all the race, slowing down a little bit, which is always recommended, right? Take a silent retreat for 7 days, do meditation in the morning and slow yourself down. And we have a chance, all of us, to think a little bit more clearly about what's really going on with our lives. Where are we at? What do we want to be our legacy. When we're sitting on our deathbed, what do we want to look back on with pride? We wouldn't want to say, oh my gosh, I finally got that raise and I was making more money than I'd ever made before. You don't want to really think about that so much as what did I do to help people? How was my relationships with my family, with my wife, with my husband, could be with my loved ones? What is really up, what am I really up to in this life? It's time to stop and think about that. So I think I've said enough for the moment. We do want to recognize that in this same configuration with Uranus, Chiron being at 9 degrees is also involved. Also makes a sextile and trine to the sun and moon. And I think there's actually parallel, no, not in this case. I was thinking there's a parallel there, but there isn't. But the other thing we want to mention with Chiron, of course, is that tuning into where we've been traumatized in the past and where we might be reacting when we're angry. We're not always angry because of a situation that could be triggering. We're really angry because there's some upset deep inside ourselves. And if we can recognize that, we go a long way towards improving human relations. And that's what Chiron is all about, recognizing our flaws deep within ourselves, the places where we were traumatized in the past, where we may yet heal if we can pay enough attention to that lost part of ourselves that's hurting, like a lost child, like a small child, and kind of bring that into better consciousness. That's the way to deal with that. Now, another thing I've been talking about all the time with this is that we have the opposition of Eris to Haumea as a T-square to the Pluto position. And you can see right here, it's very clear. There's only a degree separating Eris and Haumea. And Haumea is another one of these new planets and has to do with connection to nature. Connection to nature is so important. It's really fundamental to our human condition. And we're beginning to recognize that. And I would say we're beginning to re-recognize that because this comes from earlier, from tribal societies, from indigenous societies. But now we're beginning to recognize that those are, rather than being a primitive way and not a good way to look at things, not as sophisticated, now we're beginning to see that there's some fundamental truth there that's important not to lose track of. And pioneers like, for example, Joseph Campbell, who had very strong Haumea in his chart, brought that, or bringing that to bear with understanding that, mythology as a record of the human imagination with regard to what we're up to, what we have going, who the gods and goddesses are that really affect us. That is a direct, what Campbell said about that was it was a direct connection to nature that was helping us to reestablish our connection to nature. So considering this is a nature planet, I think it's very important in this COVID times to recognize the impact on the Earth, to recognize that the environmental issues are very important, that we can't ignore climate change, for example. So all of these things are kind of coming together in a certain way. You could almost say that COVID is the Earth's response to people ignoring the environmental situation to the extent that they have, because it gives us a little bit of a wake-up call. Nature is powerful, science is powerful. We have to pay attention to what the scientists tell us when they tell us that there's too much greenhouse gas in the atmosphere, as just as much as when they tell us there's too much virus in the contacts unless we social distance. So that's one of the factors, and then we can see just in the mathematics of it that Eris is exactly opposite to Haumea with 1 degree different, and that is pretty much on the midpoint of Saturn and Pluto, which is around 25 here, you see, between 23 and 27. So this is all happening right now. This is it. I think these few months here, leading up to the election, leading up to the end of the year, it's really a chance for us to get our act together. And it's also a chance to see that the COVID situation is not going away. It's not improving, as I've been talking about, because here we have this coalition of planetary energies separated by only 4 degrees apiece. So that's pretty close together, but it gets closer and it gets closer leading up to November. So that's something to think about as well. Now, having said that, let's take a look at another chart. And I do want to look at the full new moon coming up, which is on the 18th. Now this is going to be startling, I think, if you take a look, because actually the Capricorn position of I'm sorry, the Capricorn position of Saturn is what I was saying. Saturn at 26 degrees. And this is an inconjunct because Leo makes an inconjunct to Capricorn, but that's also 26 degrees where the new moon hits. And not only that, we have Mercury right nearby, which is about consciousness. And then not only that, if you look, not only do we have this T-square, which is very similar, it's 24 degrees versus 26 now, of Haumea, but Mars, a slowing Mars, getting ready to retrograde at the 28 degree mark here, is right there with Eris. So this is a very powerful new moon that sets the tone for the next 30 days of September, August leading to mid-September. And it's a doozy, all of this is just now still the separation of these it's only a couple of weeks from now. This is the same thing, 4 degrees apart. But, the thing that I think is really fascinating is the fact that Mars, in its retrograde cycle, is getting ready to hit Eris twice, and then eventually a third time next year it'll go finally through again. But the retrograde hit is coming up on October 4th. So I thought that would be useful for everybody to think about when we're looking at these next few months, namely that Mars, if we put the right mouse on it, do a right mouse click on Mars, it tells us in this little panel that it is direct, but that the next retro station is going to be on the 9th of September at 28 degrees, and it's going to go all the way back to 15 degrees of Aries, and that's going to be on the 13th of November that it finishes its retrograde, so it's through the election cycle. And we have a Mercury retrograde coming up too during that cycle, just to show you. So that's the other thing to think about. So Mercury here at 28 degrees of Leo, it will get into Virgo. It will retrograde on the 13th of October at Scorpio. Yeah, it goes all the way to Scorpio. And then it goes back to 25 Libra. And look at the station date. It's the 3rd. So November 3rd is kind of a big date. That's our election here in the United States. So the fact that Mercury is going to be stationing to direct motion on the 3rd, this happened already on 2000. And there was an astrologer predicted that we wouldn't know the results of the election for weeks, and that was where it was a contested election. There was a recount and all kinds of stuff going on there in 2000. So this election is likely going to be similar to that, and the fact that there could be contested results, there could be forced recounts, or waiting for the mail-in ballots might be a huge thing, because there's going to be a lot of that this time. And there's going to be all kinds of discussion. So that transition is not going to be easy. Whatever happens in that election, however that comes out, it's going to be not easy to discern. We're not going to know the result on November 3rd, that's for sure. And I think most states are allowing longer times for the ballots to come in. So that's all got to be resolved too. Anyway, so that's the Mercury retrograde coming up. But I wanted to mention, in regard to this Mars retrograde, when it does retrograde on September 9th, and start going backwards, of course, it will eventually get back to this same point, and that's October. So I'll look at that one just briefly with you guys too. So in October, on the 4th, we have, it's just crossed the position here, 24 degrees 07 versus 24 degrees 08. So this is another one of those same considerations, or configurations, I should say, with Mars and Eris making that square, and you can see that the alignment is different now, because now, although it's still a 4-degree separation, these planets are starting to turn direct. And in fact, Jupiter is already direct. I would think that Saturn and Pluto would still be retrograde, but it looks like Saturn turns to direct before Pluto does. I'm not sure how that happens when the 22 and 25 are maybe it's because of the heliocentric positions. But basically, they're turning direct to direct motion. And once they do, of course, Jupiter, being the much faster, is going to get closer and closer to Pluto, is what's happening towards the end of the year. And one more thing, again, you can see the upcoming retrograde. That's going to be by October. Mercury will be in Scorpio, but it will only get to 12 degrees of Scorpio, or 11 degrees 40 minutes. And that will be on later on in the month of October, and then it will start to move backwards until the 3rd. So if we look at the election, and what I have on the election is I actually have 8 p.m. because that's when the polls close, but you can see by this, it's no longer retrograde, it's direct. So this is the direct motion of Mercury in the election day sequence, but look, it's right on this T-square again. It's 2 degrees away, less than 2 degrees from Haumea, so we have 27 degrees of Libra versus now 23 degrees of Aries, which is where Eris is. And when these line up, now you can see things are getting closer because Jupiter is only a degree away from Pluto and 4 degrees away from Saturn. And this is November 3rd. By November 15th, it becomes even more interesting because Mars actually gets up to this point too. Mars starts to close the gap, having been, now that it's, well, wait, it's still retrograding here. No, I guess that's not true. Oh, I'm sorry, that's the solstice chart. That's another chart that we can look at. But just to say that things are getting closer and closer towards the end of the year. And of course, eventually Jupiter and Saturn will move out of Capricorn into 0 degrees of Aquarius. And that's the last chart I'll show you in this sequence. But we can just recognize that, for example, 23 opposite 27, the midpoint is 25. And that is where, also that is between Pluto and Saturn. So really the basic thing that I have to say is that these next few months are going to be intense. You know, August, the new moon of August, the new moon, all these new moons coming up are very intensely focused on this triple conjunction, which is getting stronger and stronger up to around the middle of November. And then we can, or December for that matter. We can look at December, and this is December right about the solstice. So the sun is at 0 degrees of Capricorn, and Jupiter and Saturn are at 0 degrees of Aquarius. So this is the big Aquarius called the Great Conjunction, Jupiter and Saturn, moving into an air sign, moving into the sign of Aquarius, which has to do with social issues, with the improvement of society. And at this point, by the end of this, we see that Jupiter is getting closer and closer to the point where it will be conjunct again with Eris. So, and that Pluto is at 23. So this is a perfect Mars, Eris, and Pluto square. And we do have this, Haumea is beginning a little bit further in. But that's still, look at that, it's kind of in between where we have the positions of Pluto and Saturn. So this is just so dramatic towards the end of the year, all of it. And I guess what I really want to say about all this is that, put the new moon back up, is that basically we can use these planetary positions as a way of informing us of what we're about, what's happening. And, you know, the thing is, we have to take advantage of this opportunity. The chances are now to really have the society start to shift. There's ways that we can see the society shifting. If we look around us, we can see all the protests of Black Lives Matter that, you know, we want to see equality, we want to see inclusivity, we want to see the police not administering unequal justice to different races. We want to see that to be fair and according to natural law, as I say, with the way that Haumea comes into it. We can understand that there is a principle beyond just the simple matter-of-fact principles of getting our society back together and having the economy go, that we have to also adhere to good practices with each other. We have to really, the society that we're in has been, the flaws in our society have been exacerbated and are showing, this COVID really shows up the flaws in our society. And I think it's time to recognize that and to trace it back to where each one of us can contribute to the evolution that's happening. You can make a change. You may feel helpless. You may think you're one person and you can't make a change, but that's not true. You can make a change because when you change your own attitude, it sends a vibratory message out to all around you, and it just creates the mood of change. It creates a field of change that is very important, and everybody's got their part. Just as everybody has their part in protecting ourselves from this virus, everybody also has their part in seeing the evolution of society go through that we really need to have go through. So it's not a time of, oh my God, it's a hopeless situation. it's a hopeful situation. It is a time when we are enabled to get our act together as an entire society and really make something happen that we will be proud of when we look back on these years. And that's the point. That's the purpose. So that's my presentation for today. It was short and sweet. I'll transition back. So just to emphasize, astrology is such a marvelous tool. It opens us up because we can understand that the positions of the heavens, if you look at your natal chart, the positions of the heavens are absolutely if reflected in your character. And how could that be? There's ways that it doesn't make any sense if you look at it from a purely linear thinking viewpoint. And so to accept that, to broaden our horizons, and to be able to see that it does make sense, we're living in a magical universe that has a point to it, that everything has its purpose, that it's all part of a vast symphony of change that's going on all the time, and we're part of it. And you can be part of the society that you're in and help it make its transition. And that's really what it's all about. They say that it isn't what you've got that counts. It's what you do with what you've got that counts. And so there again, it's time to take action. That's what the message of Eris is. It's time to wake up, find your deepest purpose and what you most sincerely believe, and act upon that. And only upon that, only from your own inner lights, not by brainwashing, and not by consensus thinking, which can be a little bit behind where we need it to go. But it's up to each one of us to advance that consciousness, that group consciousness, and make a difference in this world. And I leave you with that. We'll talk soon. Have a great rest of the week. Bye.